The end of the world is at our doorstep. All the signs have come true. A huge wave will wash us away. Do you believe in the end of the world? In a giant tsunami that will wash us away? Tell me about it.
I do. A tsunami will wash us away. That's it, I'm done. Turn it off. That's a funny question. It's a funny topic. Yeah, in the sense that many people, for ages, I get the impression that people are just waiting for the apocalypse. Like, oh, a comet flew by, right? Like in our band Aria, that thing that a comet is a sign of misfortune, right? A sure sign. So basically, let me try to explain it to you in this way. It's as if humanity has always wanted to completely remove itself from this world, if I use modern youth slang. But that's actually quite a strange thought. Again, there's a reason for that. There is a reason because a human in principle is a loving creature, kind of, a bit of an endorphin junkie, an endorphin maniac to some extent. So like the apocalypse, yeah, that's obviously bad. Of course, we're all going to die, but before that, just imagine how spectacular it will be. All of this wave, it's coming, it's washing everything away. And even just thinking about it already gives you a certain rush of endorphins. And in a way, this is probably somewhat similar to professional sports, the more, especially extreme sports. If you're, say, riding a motorcycle at over 200 kilometers per hour, and there's a pothole somewhere on the pavement, as they love to make on our local roads, well, that's it. That'll unfortunately be your very last ride on that particular track. But nevertheless, people still race. They still ride at 200, even 300 kilometers per hour. So what am I getting at with all of this? The point is, no matter how many times we've looked into the future, now speaking seriously, no matter how many times Nastya and I have looked into the future, or me separately, or with my alumni club, we do this a lot. I mean, I have a school for advanced studies. I've been doing this for 12 years, and we've graduated, 3,000 or 4,000 people. That is highly experienced practitioners. 80%, by the way, reach their goal. 80%. So out of 3,000, how many is that? That's about 2,000, yeah, a bit over 2,000, a little more than 2,000. That's a whole army of practitioners. But none of us have actually ever seen a real apocalypse, like a massive tidal wave just sweeping everything away in its path or something dramatic like that. On the level of, popular culture, it's kind of always played out like that. And just recently, we actually recorded something about a zombie apocalypse. There will be a link somewhere here if you're watching on YouTube. If you're not watching on YouTube, there might not be a link, but again, that's even more reason to watch this video on YouTube. There are more options to add those very links. And I said there that the zombie apocalypse is essentially a virtual apocalypse that plays out on the astral planes of the Earth. And so to deal with this not so positive energy we have here on this planet during the Great Transition, among other things, because we've been experiencing a real great transition since the 1980s, that is, as a planet, we are moving upward in terms of vibrations. In order to shed this ballast downward, we need certain mechanisms. And sometimes these are real mechanisms, wars, various cataclysms, and so on and so forth. Look, on this channel, I explain in detail how all of this works and why we are actually moving upward, not downward. I've talked about this in a bunch of videos already, and sometimes this plays out virtually. That is, sometimes it plays out through the astral planes of the Earth, through the so-called zombie apocalypse, for example, which appears in games, movies, music, and so on, as well as through all sorts of other, in fact, apocalyptic themes. So we can extrapolate this zombie apocalypse theme entirely, as if to transfer it completely to any kind of apocalypse. A giant wave, a meteorite impact. What else could there be? I don't know. An alien invasion, an invasion of mutant wild bees. Basically anything at all. But none of this, yes, absolutely none of this, unfortunately or fortunately, is going to happen in the near future for sure. It is absolutely guaranteed. On the contrary, we are currently moving upward in terms of our vibrations. And all these apocalyptic themes, it's as if they're being played out just to release some kind of social tension as one of the channels for letting off steam. The only thing is, if we don't go for the exaggerated scenario where a giant wave wipes everyone out, but instead just talk about the idea of a wave, in other words, a tsunami that might not wipe out everyone, but say certain islands, certain parts, a certain part of some countries, like what happened in Thailand not so long ago, for example. It was an absolutely devastating tsunami. In fact, we were in Thailand on that beach, and as far as I remember, the most Well, the most destructive part hit Caron Beach in Phuket. If I'm wrong, please correct me, write the name of the beach somewhere. Now, the energy there is completely different. It's very calm, very measured. So essentially, the tsunami that happened there was also, as cynical as it may sound, a kind of release of negativity, a discharge of energy that hit that particular part of the planet. I see similar releases happening in the future. There will be tsunamis, and nearby areas will be flooded. That's why, for example, right now governments of different countries, just recently in Japan, yes, the Japanese government warned that they have a tsunami threat in the next, I think, 5 to 10 years, with a probability of around 80% in certain areas, which is quite a lot. They sent out specific instructions to the prefectures of those regions, since Japan is divided into prefectures on how to act. And the Japanese, you know, they love to calculate everything. They calculated that I think several 100,000 people are expected to die during this inevitable tsunami, right? And once again, they developed a comprehensive plan to reduce the total number of casualties from this possible tsunami by 80 or even 90%. Furthermore, all these detailed plans were handed directly to the leadership of the specific prefectures that are most likely to be hit. That's it. But that's the Japanese for you. That's the Japanese. They really, as they say, approach this problem thoroughly, right? Indonesia is under threat, I feel. Thailand is under threat. It still remains at risk. Malaysia remains under threat. The entire ring of fire around Australia remains under threat. Individual islands in the ocean, in the Pacific Ocean, in the Atlantic Ocean remain under threat. Well, that is probably even some European countries remain at risk to some extent. Some African countries remain under threat. So yes, what is the point we are making here? These massive tensions that cause tsunamis, they can actually be regulated. They can be regulated. In other words, those very architects of reality we often talk about, they can strategically redirect a certain tension. They can't eliminate it entirely, but they can certainly redirect it. And that's why it's actually very difficult, even with esoteric methods, to predict tsunamis. It's very difficult. And major earthquakes as well, yes, again, as the primary cause of tsunamis, they can occur in different places, kind of randomly. And even, by the way, in Japan itself, where they say we might have a tsunami or maybe not, maybe they will somehow redirect, so to speak, this tension somewhere else. Because again, yes, this intense tension, it is literally a form of physical tension building up within the lithospheric plates, can actually be redirected from one plate to another. At least that is how I personally see it, through the lens of my higher self, especially when I access the level of the so-called architects of reality. That is it. So, to sum up this part, globally speaking, there won't be any major world-ending cataclysms on this planet. Not on a planetary scale where everyone would die. No, solar flare and everyone dies. No. Flares can happen, and tsunamis can happen too. And there could be some other disasters as well. And earthquakes without tsunamis can also happen. And things like typhoons, tornadoes can happen too, and so on and so forth. They can happen. And most likely they will. But they won't be so destructive as to wipe out all of humanity. That's probably how I'll answer the question. I don't know whether that would be considered a positive or negative answer, pessimistic or optimistic, but that's how I see it.
Regarding specific dates, why is it still impossible to predict exact dates? Many people try, but no one can come up with a specific date.
That's because this matter is very unpredictable. Well, look, when we tune into the future, for example, through the higher self, we always record a forecast for the next month on this channel. So, for example, in August, right? What did I see there? I saw a certain movement of energy, For the following month, it's already visible. In 2 or 3 months, it's like, there's a certain branch, a main branch of reality, and around it there are many such divergences. The main highway, so to speak, is visible. I've mentioned it 150 times already. We are moving upward in vibration toward a bright future. More conscious, more harmonious, wiser, and so on and so forth. We are moving through a crisis. Crises have started actively. In fact, they basically never stopped on this planet. But truly global crises like this, after World War II, started to emerge in the 60s and 70s. They began to rise and fall all over the planet. That is, all sorts of wars began to break out. There was the Vietnam War, AIDS began to spread actively, and cancer diseases also started to develop rapidly. In fact, their numbers increased significantly. Overall, the environment began to deteriorate sharply and the climate started to change dramatically. For example, nowadays our temperatures swing from +40 to +15. If we take, for example, Moscow or Europe or even Bali, the locals there tell me that they always have a dry season in the summer, but this year everything is getting flooded again. So, and so on. And plus again, wars, cataclysms, destruction, terrorist attacks, and so on. All of this has reached an entirely new level. And this will continue for another 20 or 30 years for sure, because again, it seems like only by 2050 things will start to wind down a little bit. And by the 100th, I mean, yes, by the year 50, specifically by the year 2050. And 50 years from now, so that would be around the year 70, that's when an entirely new world really starts to take shape. And in 100 years, things will be really good. So basically, what am I getting at? I see these crises, yes, and I see a general trajectory, but the actual unfolding of these crises, the way they play out, is decided in the moment. So, roughly speaking, we have a master plan, but how do we actually carry out this plan? That gets decided in the moment and depends on a whole bunch of different factors. And that's something you can't see. Plus, very often these databases are deliberately closed off so that, again, people don't go poking around in them with their attention. As strange as it may sound, attention is also a form of energy. And if hundreds of thousands of people direct their attention to a particular database, they can disrupt the flow of time, they can interfere with it. And then the architects of reality would have to rewrite everything, redo it from scratch, re-record, reprogram, and so on and so forth. It's like, roughly speaking, you renovated your house and then a whole herd of wild boars came in and then left, right? Well, you end up having to renovate again after them and so on. That's why there are many closed bases, many bases that haven't been formed yet, and many events that simply haven't taken shape. In other words, there is a main line, but the events around it are not forming. So you can at least say something about a month ahead. And roughly speaking, you can see some kind of main line 50 or 100 years into the future. But the small things, the minor events like a tsunami, again, with all due respect to the people who end up affected by such a tsunami, as they say, you wouldn't wish it on anyone. On a planetary scale, a tsunami is a minor event. It might strike right here, or it might not, or it could potentially strike on the complete opposite side of the planet, say in a month or two. That is why we can, kind of, in advance, let's say about a full month ahead, you can really feel that the tension is steadily building up in a certain part of the Earth. It is slowly accumulating, and maybe it will eventually erupt as a major earthquake or a sudden flood. It's no coincidence that, let's say, those who are sensitive about a month, 2 or even 3 months in advance, they can already feel it. And animals can sense it too, sometime in advance, and birds as well. And nature itself really does start to change a little. But this happens only over a short period of time when, let's say, a decision has already been made to release that tension right there.
Many people try to hype up the topic of the end of the world and announce a specific date.
Notice that it almost never comes true, or rather, it never comes true, because if it had ever come true even once, you and I wouldn't be recording this video right now.
Yeah. Why do they do that? Because in the end, most likely the date passes and then everyone comes and writes in the comments that it didn't happen, that you were just making things up.
Listen, honestly, it's a question for me too. I would imagine that some of them are simply chasing after the latest hype. They don't really think ahead. They prefer to live entirely in the present moment, which in a way is probably quite good too. On the other hand, as we discussed, many cataclysms don't actually happen in reality, but they do play out virtually. Basically, videos like the end of the world, we're all going to die. Also, in a certain way, they draw a certain energy from people, from those who watch, and this energy is then processed through certain complex egregores. So in this sense, these kinds of quirky guys are still, in fact, playing along one way or another, according to the overarching plan of the architects of reality. In fact, on this planet, everything happens according to the plan of the architects of reality, simply because they are the ones who program this very plan. And the very conditions that are realized here and now are carried out according to this plan. Perhaps they really do believe in it. I'm actually more than sure that some of these guys, some are just chasing hype. Yes, but some believe, some genuinely believe that, yes, we saw it. The worst thing is if this experience doesn't teach them anything, and let's say that time has already passed and they just set a new date. This is, of course, one of those cases where it makes no difference. It's all the same, really. but maybe some of them do understand something. So look, to put it very briefly, everyone has different stories, different experiences. Some people have one kind of story, others have another. Ideally, you need to look at each person individually, either using extrasensory methods or through the higher self. With the help of the higher self, you can, in principle, any person, you, anyone, if you approach the higher self correctly, you can get answers to any questions, absolutely any questions. That is, yes, about the past, the future, your purpose, why you even came here to this planet. Where are you going? Why are you going there? For example, is this guy telling the truth or lying? Or maybe he's mistaken. Maybe he's telling his truth from his own personal worldview, but that worldview simply does not align or correspond in any way to the reality we all live in, right? And so on. That's it. So for those who are interested, as they say, let me remind you, in January, a new discounted group session for contacting your higher self will be launched. It's already close to the 20th group. I think it's the 19th, but I need to check. The school is 12 years old. Yes, you'll find all the reviews, all the links, absolutely everything below this video.
Some people go from video to video, watching for predictions about the end of the world. Then they sit and wait, the end of the world passes, and then they find the next video. It's like a psychological habit of waiting. Is there some kind of negative behavioral pattern in this?
Well, look, again, on the one hand, as we've already discussed, that's really the case. That is, essentially and fundamentally, all people in some form or another, unless they're specifically practicing mindfulness, are they? And please don't take offense. Total endorphin junkies. So, basically, people who enjoy, who get pleasure from anticipating something negative or from some extreme sports or something else. Just like what we've already talked about today. I'll put it this way. If you feel this within yourself, on the one hand, yes, you are working with, well, you are channeling negative energy through yourself. It gets processed in the egregore, so to speak, and is burned away. But on the other hand, not everyone probably wants to be a source or supplier of negative energy either. It is precisely this energy that you emit when you tune in to the end of the world. In other words, these are clearly not high, pure, or bright energies and vibrations. These are rather dense energies. Still, if you happen to have them, and you certainly do, because the basic principle of the ring and the hook is always at work here. So basically, if, let's just say, there is something for the ring to latch onto, like for example, a curtain hook, right? It's always working just like that. That is, if there's a hook, then the ring will latch onto it. But if there's no hook, then the ring simply can't latch on, physically speaking. There's nothing to latch onto. So if you're really hooked by the topic of the end of the world, if you genuinely, truly feel fear, and even write it down for yourself, yes, now it's going to happen, I don't know, in December 2024. December passes and nothing happens, fine. But then the next guru says, now it will happen in January 2025. You write down January 2025, waiting. Well, overall, this doesn't seem like a very healthy situation. And ideally, of course, it's worth taking some time to look into what exactly is causing you to feel this way. You can do this in two ways, either with the help of a psychotherapist, strange as it may seem, or with a psychosomatologist, which is actually a very effective method. In our course, we have a team of psychosomatologists specifically for people like this. Or you can work with the help of your higher self, connect with your higher self, and simply observe from there. Why am I so drawn to the end of the world? What is the reason? Maybe you experienced it once, perhaps in some past lives. Or maybe you just lack joy in this life. You actually feel dissatisfied with your life and are trying to somehow brighten it up by anticipating the end of the world. Again, yes, the privileged group is January. As the saying goes, all roads eventually lead to Rome. Yes, all roads lead to one place. As the Japanese say, all roads lead to Mount Fuji. So it's just that one of them goes, let's say, through Africa, and the other, the second one, goes directly.
But regarding such global system reboots as the fall of Atlantis or the collapse of Hyperborea Lemuria, that is, it turns out this is a massive planetary reboot. As far as I understand, not in our lifetime.
Definitely not in our lifetime. Absolutely. But maybe not in our lifetime, but after many, many, many thousands of years, most likely the same thing will happen to us. But that's how it is. You, your descendants, and your descendants' descendants have absolutely nothing to worry about. As they say, alas, unfortunately or fortunately, but there is nothing to worry about.
Then regarding smaller natural disasters that could actually pose a real danger, how can one protect themselves, perhaps through the higher self? How can you place yourself in such a space so that...
When you are, I understand, yes, when you are in the higher selves, you essentially see, you sort of live, as I call it, the golden branch of reality. The more you are in the higher self, the more clearly you understand why you came here, your purpose, what you need to do, what you don't need to do, and so on. Yes. And essentially, again, if we talk about branches of reality as such a multidimensional structure, there is a kind of golden branch of reality in which you realize yourself in the most harmonious way, exactly in the form for which you came here. If you truly reach this branch of reality, then you experience the maximum harmony, the greatest harmony that is possible. In reality, well, again, no matter how strange it may sound, you still have to die from something. That is, some people die of old age, some die, say, from illness, and some die from a tsunami. But hypothetically, if you died from a tsunami on your golden branch of reality, then that was the most harmonious departure for you, the most harmonious way to go. But if, say, you got deeply confused, lost your way, and ended up on this specific branch of reality, and although you could, in principle, have lived even longer, you left this life precisely on this branch. From this, your higher self can truly protect you.
Thank you. And my very last question is about energetic tsunamis that might come, for instance, with solar flares. Tell me, what actually happens on the subtle plane when such energetic waves come over us?
It's the etheric layer. It's the etheric layer because, well, on the planetary level, it will be felt as a strong agitation of the etheric stratum. So, for example, if it's a so-called coronal flare on the sun, or simply, well, this ejection of magma, yes, and this stream of solar radiation is carried by the solar wind toward planet Earth and literally envelops it from all sides. First of all, this is evident from the increase in the radioactive background. Yes, so many flights, airline flights, are cancelled, or, for example, their routes are changed, especially if it's a strong solar flare. That's right, yes, like a solar tsunami, exactly as you called it. On the level of energy, it's the etheric body. It's not even the astral, it's physics and the etheric, because it's dense energy. It's still dense energy. So on the etheric level, there will be a feeling of agitation in the etheric plane. People with damage in the etheric body may feel perhaps a loss of energy because, yes, it's as if the tsunami has knocked them off a bit on the etheric plane and they feel a drain of energy. That can happen. And because of this, people say that weather-sensitive individuals, when there are solar flares, should stay at home. Among other things, since the etheric body also affects the brain, solar flares often exacerbate mental illnesses and so on. How can you protect yourself from this? Strengthen your etheric body, enhance your energy. There are 1.5 million methods, really, starting from Qigong, yoga, and so on, especially if we're talking about the etheric layer. Or you can breathe in etheric energy and draw energy from your higher self into the etheric layer if you work through your higher self. That's exactly how, for example, I recovered after an MRI. I mentioned it somewhere when we were recording the video about 5G. There should be a link here somewhere. Yes, I talked about how that's exactly how I recovered. Again, let me remind you, for those who are interested in how you can recover through the higher self, it's actually a pretty simple method. Just write body recovery in the comments below. The more of you there are, the more I'll understand that it's really worth recording a separate practical lecture on this topic. As they say, don't be lazy. Since you've watched up to this point in the video, right below.
Thank you. That's all for now. Hey friends, please leave your comments below, follow the links in the description, like this video, subscribe to our channel, and always be happy.
My dear friends, for 10 years now, I've been teaching a course on the higher self for a Russian-speaking audience. During this time, about 4,000 to 4,500 people have passed through my school. I've been working on this topic for 20 years. Today, my school is one of the largest and most famous specialized schools for connecting with the higher self in the Russian-speaking world. And then I suddenly realized that it is finally time to reach out to the masses, so to speak. Yes, to the much wider world and to the incredibly vast expanse of the entire global internet. All the professional skills I have carefully developed, all the dedicated practices I have refined, and all the quick entries, thorough checks, and rigorous exams I have built over the last 10 years are now being brought to a truly global level. I now invite you to join a brand new, specially discounted group for the comprehensive Return to the True Self course, now available in English for students everywhere. 6 months of work on stopping the internal dialogue, working with blocks, and focusing on actually accessing the higher self. Answering both simple and complex questions regarding purpose, contact with God, and with the planet. Answering basically any questions on any topic, including work, relationships, and anything at all. Manifesting desires through the higher self, viewing past lives through the higher self, and everything that didn't fit into the first 5 months in a separate 6th one. And after that, you'll have the opportunity to join the alumni club, as well as the chance to continue your studies at the 2nd level of the school. The price for the discounted groups is discounted. You can find all the information about this below at the link under this video.